going well. Okay, so when your horse is behaving well, your horse is active and in front of your leg, your horse is nice on the bit and not too strong in your hands, your horse is straight, you can sit in the right place and do the right thing. When things start to fall apart is when things aren't going so well, or when you're asking the horse to do something. And I'm going to use a lot of you as examples because I see you all ride all the time. Nobody's getting picked on. This is all in the spirit of learning, so if I pick on you for something, it's just because you happen to have that habit. We all have our habits and we all have our problems, so don't feel singled out. But a lot of you guys have problems keeping your bodies organized in the lateral work, half passes specifically, especially I think like for Sylvia, half pass in the canter, straightness one direction or the other. If your horse is crooked one way, it's very hard for you to be straight, but the more straight you are, of course, the better your horse is going to be. So trying to target all of these different places and understand how your form affects your horse's function. Okay, you know, there's a reason that we ride in a certain position, and that reason is because that physically enables our horses to do their best. So the better we are and the more in sync and correct we are, the better our horses are going to go. Then I tried to really look at effectiveness of aids, and you know, teaching as much as I do all over the place, not just here but giving clinics and things like that. There's certain areas that everybody has problems. Most amateur riders have slightly lazy horses. If they don't have lazy horses, then they have horses that they're usually a little afraid of, because if the horse isn't lazy, it's very hot, and that means you have to be aware of that in your horse all the time. So we want you to have a horse that you have to push a little bit, because that horse is going to be a little more reliable and a little bit more sane for you to ride. However, the problem with having to push a little bit is it ends up making you have to push a little more and a little more and a little more until you're pushing so much all the time you're tired and you can't make your horse go and you can't get things done. So I wanted to focus a little bit, and we'll kind of go into this first, about how to be effective in helping your horse recognize your leg aids, simply learning how to kick better. I know that sounds a little coarse and a little hard, but I think you can all relate to it. You know, we all know that it's completely ineffective to keep just poking our horse repeatedly with a spur or prodding their sides. We know we end up getting tired. We can't keep going. We have to take a break because we've used up all of our energy trying to get that trot to go somewhere. So we're going to look at that quite a bit. Rein aids. I spend a lot of time in my teaching, especially in the clinics, with riders who do all kinds of crazy things with their hands. I've taught people who can't use a direct rein. They don't know what a direct rein aid is. So I'm going to go over all of that and make it hopefully as clear to you as I can. A lot of times we start compensating for our horses with our hands too, because I have a horse who's stiff to the right and he doesn't bend to the right, and so he's always leaning into my right leg and always going through the corner against my right rein. And so I learned to crunch up my right leg and hold my right hand over here, and sometimes that means I take my left hand and I hold it over here because I'm always compensating for the horse. For those riders among us who might be working at a more advanced level, we do that stuff too. It's not just the more amateur riders and the more lower level riders who do it. The advanced riders do it too. I see it almost more in my advanced riders because they feel so much in their horse that they start compensating even more for the little deficits their horses have. So I want to go into that. I'm going to use Gina for some of this in a minute to really explain what I mean by all of that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about your seat aids. What is an effective driving aid with your seat? What is a driving aid that shuts your horse down, causes it to hollow its back, causes it to do God knows what? What are your weight aids? Other thing I see a ton in teaching everywhere, not just here, but everywhere. When my horse doesn't want to go one direction, I lean the opposite way to help myself push him over there. That happens in your half passes a lot, and that's a big issue for people. Years ago, I had a trainer, one of my very first trainers, that was trying to explain lateral work to me, and the trainer kept saying, the horse has to move under your seat, not away from your seat. If you're trying to move the horse away from your seat, the horse is going to constantly try to keep his body under you. He's not going to want you to lean over to one side, so he's going to actually get more resistant the more you lean, because he wants the rider in the middle. He doesn't know that, but he does, unless he wants you off his back, and none of you have horses that want you off their backs. We're going to talk about when to make your seat lighter, how to make your seat lighter, so that you can get out of the way of a horse who might be a little blocked. And then the ever elusive and dreaded half halt that we all struggle constantly to figure out more effective ways to apply. So I'm going to have Gina come over here for a minute, and we're going to first talk about your driving aids and the driving aid incorporates your seat, but we're going to skip that for now and talk about your driving aid in your leg. And one of the things I want you all to think about a lot today, and Amelia's going to take you in and do some exercises in the room too when you want to later on, and recognizing that you have joints in your body, and all of your joints are part of what help you absorb the movement of the horse. If you're at a good point to hang out for a minute, you can halt here and just stand here. Just keep her perpendicular, keep her parallel to us, because we're going to use your body here in a second. You have hinges all through your body, and those hinges are really important. If any of those hinges straighten when you're riding and get too straight, it's going to cause you to block the horse's movement in some way. And we're going to start talking about Gina from the hip down. Okay, so her first hinge is here at her hip flexors from the waist down. She's got some hinges up here, but we'll talk about those later when we talk about the driving seat. So her first hinge is here, her second hinge is here, her third hinge is here, and she's even got a hinge here. For those of you who lose stirrups, okay, you're not utilizing this hinge if you're losing your stirrup all the time, or if you're losing one stirrup or another, you're not utilizing that hinge. And when we talk about those hinges, we have to maintain mobility in them all the time. So even into a halt, there's a small modicum of a bit of mobility. Very little, but if we stop mobilizing altogether, the first thing that's going to happen to anybody is the horse's back is going to tense and it's going to pop you off their back. If you have a horse who doesn't want to stop, who wants to drag you into the halts, who's slow to respond to your seat, you're finding yourself all the time getting pulled up off your seat, and that's why that's happening, because you're losing the hinge and the mobility when you're riding. The other hinge that's really important is this one. When she posts, this is her hinge to mobilize for. Will you just post the halt for a second?
Yes. Posting halt.
Okay, so if she doesn't mobilize that hinge, now I want you to post and straighten your knee while you do it. If she doesn't mobilize that hinge, then that happens. So then she can't do it. She's gonna mobilize her hinge again and post. That allows her to rotate around her knee, which allows her to keep her lower leg where it belongs, okay? The next hinge is in her ankle. That's really important. When we sit the trot, the leg has to do this a little bit. If the leg's not moving, the leg's holding still, stiffen that hinge, don't let me move it. Then the horse's body, when it's moving, is not going to accept and not absorb that motion. So when your horse is in motion and you're trying to be still on the horse, your illusion of stillness comes from moving your body to the point of moving so much with the horse that you look like part of its body. It's not from being still. You can't make your body still on the horse and look still, because the more still you try to make yourself on the horse, the more the horse is going to push you away from its body. So these hinges are really important, and where they become especially important is if I've got a lazy horse that doesn't want to go. Okay, and I'm going to show you what I see all the time. Gina's going to bring her heel up, and she's going to do that, and she's going to squish her horse. And that's an aid that I see all the time, and that's a really ineffective aid, because For one thing, if your horse is lazy, part of the reason it's lazy is because people have been doing that to it all its life. They've been squishing it all its life. And it's so used to that, it couldn't care less if you squish it again. So it's never going to react well to that aid. It's only going to get lazier. You're only going to have to work harder, and you're only going to get more and more in trouble. So that's where we get into the idea that you have to learn to kick. And when you learn to kick, you're not trying to kick the horse to wound it. You're not trying to kick the horse to hurt it. You're trying to kick the horse to get its attention. You're trying to make the kick something that the horse goes, oh, and opens its eyes and says, hey, she wants something. You're trying to use the kick as a backup to what should be a pressing leg aid that happens about where my hand is, okay? Squeeze my hand, Gina. So that's a pressing leg aid. If I'm on a very hot horse or a very nervous horse, I'm going to ride with a little bit of that pressing aid all the time, because that's going to stabilize my leg for that horse, and it's going to make that horse comfortable and happy. Whereas a lazy horse, if I have that pressure all the time, is just going to go, oh good, somebody's helping me move around the ring. I get a little assistance here. So the quick kick requires that I separate my knee from my thigh, and my lower leg has to be on this hinge that is on its own plane, where this can stay right where it is and this can move around. This hinge keeps it from going out of the stirrup. If I don't keep a little flexibility at the ball of my foot when I go to move my leg around, then my stirrup is going to float off my foot, and it's going to end up,
oh, do you want me to, sorry.
There, sorry. It's going to end up there or there, right? So that part of that hinge is something that we can think about a lot. So you're at the point in riding where you can keep your foot in the stirrup, you can follow the motion with the horse, you can keep your legs soft, and you're trotting along and you give a leg aid and your horse says, didn't hear you, honey, sorry, not here with you right now. And you want to say something louder to the horse. Well, the first thing you're going to do is make a little quick kick. Okay, do a little quick kick, Gina. Okay, that's a good little quick kick. Now, in Doncia's world, that might wake her up momentarily, but it isn't going to make a big impact. And I think a lot of you can relate to this. A lot of you've got horses that would be, oh, okay, I'll go. But it wouldn't make them go, okay, let's go now. And I can look at a few of you and tell you who you are, but you know too. So she has to figure out a way to make that more impactful. She's going to do that by taking her leg away a little bit more, keeping her knee rotated in, and doing what we think of as clapping the horse with her leg. So she's going to go and clap it off, and here's the important part. It can't stay on. When she claps it, it can't go like this. It's got to, sorry, good girl. It has to go like that.
She's very sensitive, as we can see.
Yeah, she's very sensitive. That's why I picked her for this part of the demonstration. So it has to go quick. So Gina, and if she moves off, we'll pet her. So give her a good clap.
I don't want you to do too hard.
No, do it too hard. Okay, that's a little more effective. That made her walk on. The first one's just made her kind of go, hey, you guys, stop it. How hard? As hard as it takes is the answer to that question. If you're trying to retrain your horse to be more sensitive to your leg, then that leg aid needs to be as tough as it needs to be until the horse reacts to it. And that's when we come into the idea of what is effective. You're trying to have an impact. You're not trying to be the nicest person to your horse that you have ever been. You're trying to teach your horse something so that you don't have to kick all the time. So one impactful kick that really is meaningful is going to get you 1,000 times further than giving 50 little ones because you feel like you're being nicer. In the end, you're not being nicer, you're just nagging, and you're just making your horse more bored and more dull. So we want to do these things to a point of effectiveness. So if she doesn't separate her knee from her lower leg, and she tries to do that with a stiff knee, okay, I'm going to have you do that. Try to do that. Try to kick with a stiff knee. She's not going to be able to just try to kick. Okay? She can't make that impactful moment. Now, I see a bunch of you do that. I'm going to pick on Sylvia. I'm going to pick on Hannah. I'm even going to pick on Casey. At times, that independence of that lower limb isn't there. So, Carolyn, I'm going to pick on you. Dorothy, I'm going to pick on you. I don't know you enough, Sylvia, to pick on you, so you're safe today. Adrienne is pretty good about this, so she gets the gold star there. She's pretty good about being able to separate that, and her horses aren't that lazy, so she doesn't have to kick that hard. So she's lucky that way. So if I don't learn to make that separation, and while you're all standing here, stand up for a second, hold your knee out in front of you, and dangle your lower limb around without moving your thigh. Look at your thigh, put your hand on it, dangle your lower limb without moving your thigh. How hard is it to dangle without moving your thigh? Switch legs, figure out if one leg's easier than the other. I'm looking at some of you are doing this. Some of you are getting it. Look how much I can swing that leg. Extend it all the way out and bend it all the way back. And yeah, and work on that independence, that you're not moving your thigh while you're doing it. Keeping the thigh as quiet as you can with it. And don't hurt yourselves. Don't fall down. So I mean, that's a simple thing, but when you isolate it and you think about it and you go into it in a moment like this, you go, hey, I can't do that. My leg doesn't do that. Now, here's the other thing. Independent hip flexor, okay? Stand up again. Bend your knee a little bit and swing your limb, swing this limb. And now try to say to yourself, when I do this, do I twist? Do I move anywhere? Do I lose my balance? How easy is it? How well can I do that? How far can I extend it backwards and forwards? Is it harder on one side than the other? Who found it more difficult on one leg than the other? Which leg is easier? Which leg is harder?
You go.
It's easier for me to stand on my left leg of all things.
Okay. So again, you're trying to look at your own body that affects your horse's body and trying to figure out what can I do to help myself learn to be more independent. Your brain has to tell this leg to swing. It also might need to tell the leg to swing outward, this way. How hard is that? Come stand down by the rail for a minute, put your hand on the wall, and do one leg at a time and see which leg doesn't like to go.
Oh, come on.
And how far does it like to go? So here's the other thing, and this is something that's actually been really hard for Gina. She's obviously a very narrow human being, right? She's very thin and very small. It's been very hard for Gina. Take your legs out of the stirrups for a minute. It's been very hard for her to learn to get her thigh away from the saddle. Okay? And that's another thing we want to think about, because when she gets her thigh away from the saddle, she can have some mobility through her hip flexor. When her thigh is clamped onto the saddle, which is where it likes to be, then this mobility gets lost. Okay?
Hey Sue,
Yes?
can you talk just briefly about the correct stirrup length to allow
Sure.
these
Yeah.
to be...
Your stirrup length has to be where you have an angle from your hip to your knee to your angle to your angle. So if this angle is too straight, like if her stirrup was an inch too long, take your foot out again, and her stirrup was a little too long, that would be too straight of a leg. Okay? If she tries to keep her legs back by pulling her thigh backwards, that stiffens her here, okay, which is something that you have a little trouble with. Okay? So she needs to be an angle. Most of our modern saddles have a knee roll. Years ago, we rode in saddles without knee rolls. Some of you are old enough to know that, some of you aren't. I mean, really no knee roll. Like I rode 4th level in a jumping saddle. And so you had no support here. So everybody was always trying to get your lower leg back. And we all did it by straightening our hip flexors and making ourselves incredibly stiff. So it's really important to have a good angle. And it's important to recognize if your saddle doesn't put you in a good angle. Like for those of us who are tall and long, a lot of these knee rolls are angled too vertically, and that pushes our leg too straight. So we have to be a little bit careful about that. Okay, so positional aids of the legs. We're going to touch on that really quickly. Come close to me a minute again. So this is important for your lateral work, it's important for your bending lines, it's important for your flying changes. The only time that your legs are going to be in a neutral position is going straight down the long side or straight down the center line or straight across the diagonal in the trot. Any other time you're in the canter, your legs are going to be positional. Any other time that you're in the trot or the walk, your legs are going to be in a position. You can't bend a horse with one leg. Okay, bending a horse with one leg is only yielding the horse, not bending the horse. So your positional aids for bending, if we talk about inside leg at the girth, your inside toe should be parallel to the girth. At the girth does not mean this, okay? And if I see it 100 times in clinics, I see everybody go into a half pass and put their leg there, or they put their leg here for an upward transition from walk to canter. Very ineffective leg position, because if you want to influence the horse, you're just pushing on leather. So here's at the girth, here is behind the girth. This is not an aid. We all give it. I've done it. I have pictures of myself doing it. Your saddle pad does not need your spur. Here is at the girth, here is behind the girth. If you are riding a very sensitive horse, very sensitive to the leg, at the girth, behind the girth might be smaller. If you're riding a horse who has a tendency to flip leads or come off the correct lead or break from canter to trot, that behind the girth slightly more will be a little bit more of a definitive aid, and it will help the horse maintain the canter lead. Anytime I'm bending, my outside leg is in the behind the girth position. So if I'm in shoulder in, haunches in, half pass, corner, circle, any other places we bend, I'm going to be slightly behind the girth, okay? Anytime my inside leg is a bending aid, it's always going to be at the girth. So if I'm going in a left half pass, my left leg is going to be here. Okay, again, it's not going to be here, because that's not anywhere for the horse, and I'm just kicking the horse in the shoulder, and that is not an aid. And I've even seen that, and that one's really not an aid. Okay, so really quickly, the use of the thigh.
It's going to be sweaty under there.
I'm not going to play with your inner thigh. So,
Safe sport!
safe sport. In the thigh, the muscles of the outer thigh are really useful. The muscles of the inner thigh are very not useful. If she squeezes her inner thigh, it pushes her up out of the tack. Squeeze your inner thigh up more. Okay? She can't move. That just locks her in. There's a few of you guilty of that. Christine, you get into your inner thigh sometimes. Hannah, into your inner thigh sometimes. Casey, a little bit. Carolyn, a little bit. Dorothy, a little bit. Not so much Sylvia. Gay, a little bit sometimes. So this is going to happen whenever you feel like you want to stabilize your body, or your horse is pulling on you, or you're trying to ride a really effective half halt. You might come in here by accident instead of the idea of wrapping your outer thigh around the horse a little bit. This is going to be a very stabilizing aid in your medium extended trot. It's going to stabilize your upper body in the medium and extended trot. It's going to stabilize your body in the half halt. But you don't want to use the outer thigh muscle. So if you all stand up again, try to get a little slightly pigeon-toed, and try to put pressure on your outer thigh to bring your knees together. Try not to put pressure on your inner thighs to bring your knees together. And then release it, and then do that again. And I'm putting you pigeon-toed because you want to be a little rotated inward. If you're rotated outward, Gina likes to do that. She used to love to do that.
Used to.
Yeah. So if I do that, I'm only going to go into my inner thigh. So turn your toes out a moment. Try to bring your knees together. Okay, so it's harder, right? It's harder, and you almost have to use this to do it. So we don't want to use that, we want to use this. Okay? And the last thing, what's the difference between supporting the rhythm of the gait and nagging with the leg? A supportive rhythm is going to be what your leg naturally does when the horse trots if this joint is soft. Okay? Your leg is going to move, your heel's going to drive a little down each stride, your leg's going to make a little circle. And that's going to support the rhythm of the horse. And if you're riding towards cadence, which not all of you are thinking about right now, but something very important in Casey's world, Amelia's world, you're riding, my world, we're riding towards cadence. Sylvia is a little bit getting into that. That supporting rhythm is going to help you with the cadence. Sometimes you're going to ever so slightly exaggerate that, and your horse is going to find a little bit more lift and jump through his stride. Most of you need to work to get that feeling of that little circle going, so that when this is happening, it's part of this. It's part of the mobility through your hip, okay? So, and this is the last thing we're going to go through before we kind of get into things. We're just going to talk about directional rein aids, okay? We have several directional rein aids. We have the direct rein, which it means that from my elbow through my wrist to the horse is a line, a straight line, so that there's not a broken line. If I have a broken direct... Stand up here, Duncia. If I have a broken direct line, her hand is too high or her hand is too low. Anytime I take the bend out of my elbow, I will no longer have a direct rein. I don't know how many of you have had a lesson from me, but I've said, please bend your elbows. You have to have flex, you have to have the ability to use your bicep to bend this joint, okay? And again, this is a joint. It's not a solid. So this is a rein position that really has no business being in dressage. Sorry. Okay, an open rein. Some of you have a lot of trouble with this, and I have a lot of trouble getting people to really do this. So an open rein means you take it away from the horse's body, okay? And this is a very useful aid in a lot of ways. Put your head up, Duncia. What are you doing? Yeah, she said she's very bored. It's hot. This is a really useful aid in young horses. This is how we teach them to turn. Because when you get on a young horse for the first time, they have no idea how to turn. We teach them how to follow the rein. You want to do this without stiffening and straightening your arm. You can even do it with your elbow at your side, okay? Which a lot of times people are like, oh! So you're trying to keep the same angulation through your elbow to your wrist to your fingers, and just move that hand in. That's an open rein. That's a really useful aid when your horse is high in the neck and needs to be rounder. It's a very useful aid when your horse doesn't want to turn and he's blocking you. Now, what happens a lot of times when people go to an open rein, Gina's doing well because she's keeping the opposite side of her body the same. She's independently moving this rein. Now, what I see a lot is hands like to follow each other. Exactly. So she does that. Now, that is an indirect rein. And an indirect rein has a really big purpose. But it doesn't have a purpose in steering your horse. You're not trying to teach the horse to turn from your indirect rein, especially if they're green and especially if they're old and stiff. An indirect rein is just a rein for a horse to lean against. And you want to use your indirect rein, which means that rein travels towards your opposite hip, okay, either side. It travels towards the opposite side of the rider's pelvis. And those aids are very important in our half passes, our pirouettes. They're important to create flexion in the horse's pole, but they're not a steering aid. And I see a lot of people steer with indirect reins. So that's something you want to really get rid of in your riding because it's not productive and it's not helpful. There's an indirect rein of opposition, which actually means you're using both reins indirectly at the same time, which is also a very complicated aid for a horse to understand and really only comes into play, I think, in half passes and pirouettes. I can't really think, can you think of another time you would use an indirect rein of opposition? Okay, just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing something. But I can't think of any movement where I would do this, and I see this actually. I had a rider in my last clinic who, and I'm not sure what she wanted her horse to do, but she literally crossed both hands over each other. And I said, that, you have to stop doing that. That's not helpful and it's not going to be very useful to you. So for your purposes, for most of your purposes, until you're working on your half passes and your pirouettes, you're really going to leave your indirect rein out of the business. You'll start to understand it when you start working on small flexions at the pole, which is one last thing we're going to talk about, and then Amelia's going to take some of you indoors. The small flexions in the pole, come here, large mare. We have to make a difference between what's bend in the neck and and flexion at the pole. Bend in the neck originates here and means that the whole neck turns. That is a neck bend. That is not a flexion aid. Okay?
Oh, sorry, startling.
Flexion is at the pole, and it's about, you've got about this much space between your two sides to flex. So you've got about 4 inches to both sides of your horse's pole. Flexion and flexion. Okay, now if I'm not making her be on the bit for this, so because she's sound asleep and thinks that this is stupid, but for your purposes to understand, the distance of flexion is very small. Okay, flexion comes into play to proceed bend. Okay, if I'm going to bend my horse through a corner, I'm going to flex the pole first. Then I'm going to put my bending aids, which are again, my inside leg at the girth and my outside leg behind the girth, and bring the horse through the turn. I think that those things, you can go. We're done with you. Those things get lost a little bit. Thank you, Gina. Yeah. Yeah, good. Those things are if you ride with the idea that those things are at the heart of all of your rides, that you're thoughtful about those things all the time, a lot of things will improve for you. If you let those things get lost, you'll find yourself, all of a sudden, my right half pass, I just can't get this to happen. Or I've got this little problem, he tilts his head this way or that way. Or little things creep in because you've allowed those little compensations to come into your riding all the time. We all do it. We all do it. Don't have realistic expectations of yourself, I guess is what I say, but we all do it. The big thing is for us to start to recognize it, and then to be able to move into going, okay, well, what can I do about this? How can I fix this? And how can I become more aware of it? If I know when I stand on the ground and I go to hold this leg up and bend this knee back and forth, that on this side, whoa, I can't keep my balance and I can't really do it, and this side, oh, I do it just great. I know I've got to work on that side of my body, right? I know that because I know if I'm on the horse, I'm doing the same thing. So like I'm on Carolyn all the time about her right leg. Her right leg wants to do everything for her body. So she's constantly on her horse with the right leg, and she brings her heel up and she pushes on him and she pushes on him. So she has to spend so much time thinking about, am I doing things equally? Because the more equality I bring to the picture, the better I can make my horse. Your horse isn't equal either. And most of the time, our bad side is our horse's bad side. Not all the time, but most of the time. So if I ride the horse every day, I can guarantee you my left side is my bad side. I know that. I have trouble sitting to the left. I have more difficulty using, my left leg is stronger, so I use it more. I'm dominant with my left hand. I know that about myself, and I know it, that I'm probably making every horse I ever ride a little bit worse on that side than on the right side. So I have to recognize that stuff about myself and kind of constantly work on it. So having kind of gone through this part of the discussion, does anybody have any specific questions about something that they know that they do that's difficult, that they can't see a way to fix?
So I can, sometimes I take video and towards the end of the lesson, especially when I get tired and I'm thinking I'm going with the horse and then I'm going with the horse. So where am I stable? Where am I stabilizing without going stiff?
So you're doing what I always tell people. They need to sit the trot from the waist down. We start sitting through our upper torso. I can pick on a few of these for that. Dorothy, a little Casey, little Adrian. Little bit you have that problem. You don't so much. You do. So that's recognizing where you're using your core. Most likely you need more stability in your upper core and less tension in your lower core, and you need to figure out how to separate those things. Because if I'm sitting the trot and my hip is independent, I'm moving through here. There's a very small amount of motion through where my belly button sits. There's very little motion above there. The majority of the motion is through my pelvis and below the waist. So I have to figure out which core muscles. My core muscles to tell my pelvis to go forward are my low ones. They push the pelvis forward. But my core muscles to stabilize my upper body are my transverse abs and my upper into my diaphragm and into my rib cage muscles. And to some degree, the shoulder girdle. And that, I think that's another place that it's hard to use those muscles without getting tense here. That's something we want to work on with you, because you're very good at stabilizing this, but it goes into your arms, and then your arms do funny things. You have a little bit of that trouble too, Carolyn, a little too. So again, 90% of this is recognizing how to separate your body parts and how to use one part of yourself without the rest of it going away. You know, all of us, like when you bend a horse, you want to abandon your outside aids and go into your inside aids. That's every lesson we give. Yes?
Can we go quick inside and
yeah,
because that way I can get on Fabia?
Yeah.
And then you can answer the questions after.
And we can keep answering questions inside.
Okay.
Yeah. What was yours, Carolyn? Go ahead.
The question was just, how do you work on separating these things when you're trying to do 20 things at once? And, you know, it gets hard to kind of focus.
I think you have to get to where you have a little, for me it's like I have a little mental checklist in my brain, and whenever I have a moment in the horse where I feel